short story in commemorating Veterans Day. So our first presenter, authentic presenter, is Marian Ambrose, who is a teacher extraordinaire. She just can't stop teaching either. Published author, community volunteer, excellente, and president of Green Gables. She is going to share some things from Green Gables. Did I say Marian Ambrose? No.
Yeah.
Did I say that?
Good afternoon. I am a teacher. I've been a Florida history teacher for many years. Right now I'm a STEM teacher. I do whatever they need. Each year they come up with something new and I just do it. But my favorite years were as a Florida history teacher. I am also president of the GFWC Melbourne Women's Club. And it was through that organization that I got involved with Green Gables. One of our members went to an open house and came back and said, did you know that there's an old house on US 1 and the woman who built it was one of the first presidents of the Melbourne Women's Club, and that was Nora Wells. So once I heard that, I thought, yeah, I should go over and check it out. And as soon as I walked through the door, I was hooked. I have been there ever since. My husband says I live there. But I have found that I feel a strong connection with Nora Wells. She, as the Women's Club beginnings, were a book club, a literary club, and they shared literature with each other, and Nora was known to do that. Upstairs in the trunk room, she had books that she shared with her neighbors. And then the Wells built the first library in Melbourne. So that was the origins of the Melbourne Women's Club, and Nora was fully into that. So I felt a connection with her. And the more I learned about her, or the more I would like to be like her. She was a very independent, strong woman, especially for her time period. And we found some different documentation here that's just extraordinary that I'd love to share with you. She was a very organized woman. This is her household inventory, handwritten. The date is June 20th, 1931. And this is the inventory of everything that was in Green Gables house, the Wells home. All handwritten, room by room, which will be invaluable when we do the restoration. So, and I'll put these things out for everybody to take a look at. And then this is the typewritten copy of it. So we have it in her very neat handwriting, and we also have it typed. And then I got into some of the records, and I found her last will and testament. And in this, she left her children. Mr. Wells predeceased her. When she died, her will told her children exactly what they had to do with the money that she left them. She didn't just leave the money, she left the money and told them, this is what you will do. You will invest it in this and this and this so that it will grow. And it, so they didn't have much choice. If they wanted to get the money, they had to do exactly what Mommy said. So another example of how highly intelligent and just thoughtful she was to think of her children's future that way and to kind of direct it. So the more we find out about her, the more we realize what a strong, smart woman she was. I also found a couple of things here. This is her cemetery plots. They pre-bought their cemetery plots. This check was 1931 when Mr. Wells died, and it was the receipt for her paying for perpetual care of her grave and his. So they already had bought the cemetery plots a while before, and then she had the whole thing paid for and had perpetual care and had the monuments. I had the receipt for the monuments as well. Another thing I have here is the letter from Harbach Funeral Home certifying that Mrs. Wells was cremated, which was very unusual in those days, but that was her wish. And so she made sure that she got what she wanted, as usual, and she was cremated. Some of if you haven't had a chance to come tour Green Gables, you really need to. And you really need to tour it when John Daly is giving the tour. He is extraordinary in giving tours. And a lot of the times when he goes through, I'll be listening, and he talks about the expansion of the house. The house was built as a four-square, and then later they expanded it. And he kind of imagines Mrs. Wells saying to Mr. Wells, this is not big enough. This is what I want. And that's what Mr. Wells did. This big, powerful man. And Mrs. Wells basically got what she wanted whenever she wanted it. I also have a lot of other papers with titles and maps and things of the area. They own a huge amount of property. They owned pineapple plantations on the beach, so I have a lot of those documents to share with you as well. And I have to tell you, when we first found these and I started opening them, you get that tingly feeling. When I teach Florida history, I take my kids to St. Augustine, and to pique their interest before we go, I tell them ghost stories all about the different historical places. So they can't wait to go there. And then we kind of stick the history in their head while they're there. So they do learn, but they're very excited about the ghost stories. So when I tell them, after we go, I tell them, really, there's no such thing as a ghost. What you're feeling is the awesomeness of history. When you step into a place where people have lived and died and carried out all sorts of functions and ancestors and things like that, you get that feeling, you get the little goosebumps and the hair stands up on the back of your neck. That's the awesomeness of history. That's not a ghost. That's history still living. The energy is still there. The memories are still there. And that's what I hope you'll feel when you look through these documents as I did. I just got that little tingle. It wasn't a ghost, it was just the awesomeness of history. So I'll make all these available to you in the back. Thank you.
How did you find the papers? Where were they?
Well, we were searching because Carol had remembered that there were ledgers that were handwritten by Stanford, which was the son. And we went searching for those. We couldn't find anything. So the daughter-in-law, Susan Kraft, lives actually next door. So we were sitting out on the porch, which we do a lot of evenings, having coffee, and Susan came over and I said, boy, I wish I could find those ledgers. And she goes, what ledgers are you talking about? And I told her, we're looking for some original paperwork so that we can share with the Historical Society. She goes, oh, I have a whole box in the kitchen. So she brought the box over and then, it's full of these amazing things. So I started going through that, and John's going to start scanning. But she said, yeah, I have like 3 more boxes over there if you'd like to take a look at them. So I can't wait. We're gonna dive into all of them. So maybe we'll have more to share with you at a later date. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For Susan to get this papers to Green Gables. That was great. Our next presenter is Barbara Arthur, native Brevardian and daughter of a Homestead family, well, granddaughter, great-great-granddaughter, Homestead family at Honest John's Fish Camp. Related to John Hyatt in the back, that's her cousin, he's from here too. She is also a community volunteer, and she worked for Brevard County Commissioner Nancy Higgs and Senator Bill Nelson. She has been I'm very grateful that she's been a South Brevard Historical Society member and member of the board. Barbara?
Carol asked me to come in and talk a little bit about an apron that I received when I was young. And it's made by the Seminole Indians. And so I wanted to give you a little bit of background about their particular style. Patchwork clothing is what they call it. And it was considered by many to be the Seminoles' traditional dress. But it's really pretty modern. And it began around 1920. But as early as 1880, the hand-operated sewing machine made its appearance in the many Seminole camps. And it would in time transform the appearance of the Seminole clothing. By 1892, a noted Everglades explorer saw that there were sewing machines in all of the Seminole camps that he visited in the southeast of Florida. Around 1920, the Seminole seamstresses began to sew stripes of contrasting color. Here's an example. Thank you, Carol. Both men and women's clothing was patterned with these stripes from the top to the bottom. This new decorative technique developed by the Seminole women became known as patchwork. These bands of designs were sewn directly onto the body of the garment, forming an integral part of it. Patchwork was rapidly adopted as a way to further embellish the already colorful clothing. As time went on, the designs became more and more intricate as the seamstresses became more and more adept at their skills. Often the designs used on women's skirts today are extremely complicated. The invention and the utilization of this patchwork took place at approximately the same time that the Seminoles began finding employment in tourist attractions. At these attractions, the Seminole women enjoyed freedom from their daily tasks, which were routine in their Everglades camp. They were also encouraged to actively be involved in making arts and crafts for the tourists to see and purchase, such as Seminole dolls dressed in patchwork dresses. I have a book that I will leave up here that shows some of the dolls that were made to look, wrong page, okay. And they have, you can see the different patterns too. They were really unique. I tried to find some information about my particular apron, but all I could find was information about the skirts and the jackets and the dolls, but I didn't find anything particular about the apron. Anyway, the women were encouraged to make these items for the tourist trade. And so this created a commercial market for other patchwork items. Not only has patchwork become an important means of income for the Seminoles, it's also a source of tribal and creative pride. I received this apron from my aunt, who lived in Everglades National Park. Her husband worked for the National Park Service, and she was always, also having been a native from Brevard County, was always interested in the Seminoles and also anything having to do with history. And so I have had it all these years. I've never worn it. I was afraid to wear it. And so I have just tucked it away, and I see that my kitty cat found it and sat on it, and so I have a few kitty cat hairs on it. So I'll leave the book up here, and you also can come and look at the apron.
Barbara,
Yes.
could you tell, in case there's some new people, about how the Seminoles used to come and trade,
They did. They came and dug out canoes, and they would come up the Indian River Lagoon, and they would trade. Actually, my grandfather and John's grandfather too, we have the same grandfather, traded with the Seminole Indians, and so they were very happy to come and barter. And the women particularly liked the beads. You'll see pictures of the women with lots of beads around. I think it was a matter of prestige that the women wore these beads.
Weren't they at Silver Springs?
I believe they were. I can't confirm that, but I think you're right. Yeah, that's right.
What did they bring to trade?
They would bring, I think, meat. They would alligator and deer, definitely deer. Yeah, and then they, would trade with cloth, because the women needed cloth to make the patchwork, and they also, like I said, also wanted the beads for the women. Okay.
Barbara, I'm going to share something also kind of along the same line. I actually have the 1880 census of Melbourne, O'Galley area, and there was actually 15 Seminoles living here in the Melbourne, O'Galley area at that time. Now, they did not write their names in the census because I guess they figured that they were not American citizens. But I'll be sharing that with you then, so too. It's kind of along the same line what Barbara was talking to you about. So we actually had Seminole Indians living here in the 1880s. So.
I did have a piece of cat fur on my slacks, too. I'm allergic to cats. Jenifer Marx is our next presenter. Jenifer, as we know, is a historian. I think of her as an inventor. And I think I have this track. The most impressive thing about Jenifer to me is, as a young woman, I think just out of college, you're Indian track. On her own, she traveled through India as a very young woman, just out of college. That really impresses me. It's kind of daunting, but I call her adventurer. Participant and archaeologist and exploration and research in undersea work, community volunteer, and also a master gardener. I think a lot of us do a lot of different things, and as our panelists are showing too, they have talents in a number of areas. Jenifer? She did not write these documents. These are
Okay. You know, I was, as Barbara was talking, I was reminded in 1973, we spent 5 months down in the Keys because Bob was working on a shipwreck down there. And I wanted to sew, so I went up to Homestead to get a sewing machine. I had one at home and here, but where I went to buy it, there were Seminole women and Miccosukee women buying machines, and they were buying mostly treadle machines.
They didn't have
Still,
electricity.
yeah, it was interesting. And my grandmother, I still have a small doll with the. And what I want to share today was the gift to Bob and me just some months ago. There's a wonderful man who lives in Vero, and he's very old, and he shouldn't be driving, but he would come up to see Bob, and he would always bring us presents. And he brought pages from a national newspaper called the National Intelligencer, the Daly National Intelligencer, which was published for a very long time in Washington, D.C., and it was as close as there was to a national paper. This is archival paper, and somewhere in here I have a page or two. I have, interestingly enough, 2 pages from 1821, which I brought today, and then next time, if I'm invited back, I'll bring 2 pages from 1838 having to do with the Second Seminole War. This page is fairly narrow. The format had changed. By 1838 it was about this much wider. And to start off with, in the, and you can get the vaudeville hook if I take too long. Okay? There's all kinds of news. There's not only a discussion of what's going on in Washington, D.C. in politics, in the Senate and the House of Representatives. Not only are there posts for what's being shipped and what is arriving in the ports, and here you have a long list of ports where, and I'll put these papers out, where ships put in to pick things up. New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Natchitoches, and so forth, Baltimore, Norfolk, and in Florida you have Fernandina, Amelia Island, and St. Augustine, and in every port they were picking up the same kinds of things. And guess where these things, you can guess after I read what they are. 60 barrels of here, let's see, Fernandina, 60 barrels of pork as opposed to 120 at St. Augustine. 125 barrels of fine flour, 250 in St. Augustine. 685 gallons of proof whiskey versus 1,370 in St. Augustine. 55 bushels of beans, and these things do not vary with any port, whether it's in Mississippi or in Virginia. 880 pounds of good hard soap in Fernandina, and 1,760 in St. Augustine. 330 good hard tallow candles in Fernandina, and 660 at St. Augustine. And then salt, 14 bushels in Fernandina, and 28 in St. Augustine. And both Fernandina, it's called Fernandina, Amelia Island, and St. Augustine is St. Augustine, East Florida, because as you know, Florida was divided into West Florida and East Florida, and that was called the Floridas. And then the last thing
is 220 gallons of good vinegar at Fernandina and 440 gallons at St. Augustine, and that is because vinegar, and we're getting back to it today with our green cleaning, was considered a fungicide, a bactericide, used in all kinds of cleaning, used in laundry and disinfection, used by doctors and in hospitals. Also makes a great hair rinse. So, can you guess where all of these provisions were headed? Who was the purchaser?
Uncle Sam?
Uncle Sam,
Yeah.
the military. Mhm. And they were being shipped. Basically out west. The provisions to be delivered at Council Bluffs, Fort Armstrong, Prairie du Chien, and St. Peter's. Some of them must pass St. Louis to their ultimate destination by the 15th of April, 1822. And and then others were going out to Chicago, as far as Chicago. So it was interesting. They were headed out west. So, and then there are here, their marriages are declared. They're classified ads for dancing masters. They're help wanted ads for governesses and teachers for children who lived in remote areas on plantations or farms. And a lot of things about runaway slaves or wanting to buy, there's one that says wanting to buy 200 slaves, young, strong men and women. I mean, it's really a reflection of the country as a whole. And also there are, maybe it's in the 1838 one, they said a woman was slandered, which was a strange word for what the story told. A woman's husband was away, and a neighbor man, knowing that Mr. So-and-so was away, came over and tried to get in, and she shot him dead. It said she shot him dead. Period. That's it. So, stand your ground. And there are messages from the President of the United States, who was James Monroe in 1821. But what I wanted to show you here today has to do with the fact that in 1821, Florida passed from Spanish hands into American hands. And the person who took over, who was in Pensacola for that ceremony in July that year, was a man who had been to Pensacola before. It was Andrew Jackson. And Andrew Jackson first arrived in Pensacola during the War of 1812, which was also known as the Second War of Independence, because the British were starting again to try to regain back what they had lost. And they used their navy, which was their most powerful arm, for this mission. And they were their tactic was to attack valuable infrastructure and seaports along the U.S. coast. And they were doing a good job. They moved down the East Coast, and by 1814 they were moving toward the Gulf Coast and planning an attack on New Orleans. And Secretary of War James Monroe assigned Andrew Jackson to protect and defend New Orleans. And as he started moving his troops toward New Orleans, he learned that the British were occupying Pensacola, which was nominally Spanish then, and it was a country neutral to the U.S. during the war, but they had allowed the British there, and they were occupying the forts. So Jackson evidently, fairly politely, asked Spain to surrender the area to him so that he could come in and push out the troops. But Spain refused. Jackson ignored this refusal, and without so much as asking the president or the cabinet, he, in November 7th, 1814, he moved in with the troops, and he attacked the Spanish Fort Barrancas, and the British retreated. And the British, in retreating, blew up the other forts that they had been holding. Barrancas was not destroyed. And So in 1818, Florida was still a Spanish territory, and the U.S. wanted to protect people who lived along the U.S. borders. So Monroe ordered Jackson to, because he was, by then he was the president, to defend the borders. But instead of defending the U.S. Against his orders, he moved in and occupied Pensacola for 14 days in May 24th, 1818. So that was illegal. He occupied a territory belonging to a neutral country. And this unlawful action, it could have led to war with Spain. And the U.S. government debated whether they should end his military career, but they didn't. Not only that, in 1821, we have the Adams-Onis Treaty, which officially transferred the Floridas to U.S. from Spain. So you wonder what would have happened if Jackson hadn't done that. What would have, if Florida would have remained Spanish longer? Would Jackson's political career have, been so successful? So it's interesting to conjecture. And in this paper, and the thing that is interesting, and I'm going to give these to the Florida Historical Society, and I'll leave it here so that you can see it, and I've actually printed it out. I scanned it, and then it's date-lined Friday, August 17th, 1821, occupation of Pensacola. An extract of a letter to the editors dated at Pensacola, July 18th. Yesterday, after a series of delays and disappointments of a peace with the whole tenor of our 20 years negotiations with Spain, the American authorities were finally and formally put in possession of this city, of the fortress of the Barrancas, which is about 20 miles south of Pensacola, and of the dominion of the Floridas. Out of tenderness to the feelings of the Spaniards, deeply excited by the painful separation about to take place between those who go and those who remain, and who are allied not only by the ties of intimacy and friendship contracted during a long period of common residence in this pleasant and salubrious region, and confirmed by a community of habits and religion, as well as of lineage and language, but knitted together by the most sacred and endearing bands of consanguinity and affiance, the ceremony was conducted with very little ostentation. I mean, this is an amazingly sensitive report, culturally sensitive. The Spanish governor's guard consisted, and just picture it, consisting of, and also think about it's July 18th, so it's got to have been pretty warm, and how overdressed they were. The Spanish governor's guard, consisting of a full company of dismounted dragoons of the regiments of Tarragona, elegantly clad and equipped, was paraded at an early hour of the morning, you bet, before it gets up, in front of the government house. About 8 o'clock, a battalion of the 4th Regiment of U.S. Infantry and a company of the 4th Regiment of U.S. Artillery, the whole under the command of Colonel Brooke of the 4th Infantry, were drawn up on the public square opposite to the Spanish Guard, having marched into town from the encampment at Galvez Spring. The usual military salute passed between them. 4 companies of infantry from the American line under the command, just a second here, okay. So, then Major Dinkins of the 5th Infantry were then detached to take possession of the Barrancas. At 10 o'clock, the hour previously appointed, General Jackson, attended by his aides, secretary, interpreters, and company, crossed the green, passed between the double line formed by the troops of both nations, who simultaneously saluted him by presenting arms, and entered the government house, where the formality of the transfer was soon dispatched, and the sergeant's guard at the gate was immediately relieved by an American guard. After a few minutes, Governor Jackson, accompanied by Colonel Cayaba, the late commandant, and heir respective suites, left the government house and passed through the same double line of troops to the house which the governor has rented for the temporary accommodation of his family. The Spanish troops were then marched to the place of embarkation. The American flag was displayed upon the flagstaff, and grand salutes were fired by the artillery company and the U.S. ship Hornet. Okay, the Hornet is very interesting. It was built in Baltimore in 1805, and it was the first ship in the Battle of New Orleans, and it subsequently spent time going back and forth across the Atlantic. It did service off the Barbary coast in North Africa against the Barbary pirates. And then it was down in South America where, after the War of 1812, the British were still harassing American shipping. And, it got in some skirmishes there. And in about 1828 or 29, it sank. And nobody's ever found it. Sank on its way going from New Orleans to Mexico. So, and that's the ship that this took place on. The Hornet, playing the Star-Spangled Banner all the while. In the course of the day, a number of the citizens waited on the new governor to pay their respects and offer their congratulations. That con, I guess, got added after. The delivery of the barrancas was performed with a little more parade. The Spanish flag was lowered to half-mast. The American flag was raised to a level with it. Both flags were, in this situation, saluted by the Spaniards, after which the Spanish colors were hauled down and the American ensign was hoisted. The Americans then saluted their national flag. The American troops made a fine and martial appearance, and the Hornet was gaily dressed. So, the correspondent writes, Governor Jackson, on assuming his functions, issued this proclamation. I learned today that he is preparing some ordinances on the subject of our municipal police, and it goes on about how they're setting up a police force and how it's indispensable, and how they also are going to make sure that precautionary measures are taken against the introduction of disease, because Pensacola had been a remarkably disease-free city. Pensacola is justly regarded as the temple of Hygeia. We have, however, thank God, escaped everything like general or dangerous sicknesses, scarcely a death having occurred among our numerous and heterogeneous population in the 3 months I've resided here. That he said only about 4 people had died. A gentleman who came from Alabama dying of consumption, who died shortly after he arrived, a sailor from Orleans who was laboring under a dysentery, a third a Creole struck by lightning a few miles below town, the fourth a Spanish soldier in the hospital. That's pretty amazing. We may now at length felicitate ourselves on our opening prospects. Pensacola is destined eventually to become the great emporium of the Gulf of Mexico and to enjoy a large share of the trade of the West. And they go on about how they need a newspaper. There's no newspaper, and they're hoping to have one soon. And that was it. And the next item, just out of interest, a swindler, a person who calls himself Tinsley and an agent of the General Post Office, has been traveling in the states south of this for 2 or 3 months past and has obtained several credits and sums of money. He's nearly 5 feet 10 inches high, sandy hair, light complexion, rather high cheekbones, stout build, and appears to be nearly 40 years old. And then it goes on to say, so that's that, and feel free to come up and
Maybe we can move those tables out after,
okay,
and you could put that out then.
okay.
We don't want to be the ones who destroyed that 1800s newspaper. Thank you. Okay. Next presenter is Dave Wickham, also a native Brevardian. Let's see. He's active in his church and the scouting program. You were part of the scout. Was that you, the scouting program, that put the blue signs up?
My son, for his Eagle project, he put historical signs up through the city of O'Galley, and he got approval from the city of Melbourne. And one of the stipulations that we had to make sure they were authentic. So everything that he came up with, research-wise, he had to go through Wyoming, Cleveland, as a lot of you know, and Wyoming. Critiqued him very, very thoroughly. But that was one of the things, and he was actually recognized by the city, and they submitted his name as a Point of Lights recipient for the state of Florida, and he actually received that from the Governor Kirk. So we were very happy, but if you ever go in the old O'Galley section, there's lots of little historical signs that are around there, and that's all his.
And then come on in.
Okay.
Microphone.
Okay.
You know, Dave.
Okay. I'm going to talk about just a couple of different things. I could be up here all day and talk to you about O'Galley and stuff like that. I always feel like I'm an O'Gallian. I'm not a Melbourneite. And because I don't want to start a battle here, guys. But I was raised in O'Galley, and my dad came to O'Galley in 1926 when he was 14. He graduated from O'Galley High School in 1929. His graduating class was himself and 4 other girls. So we have a long history of O'Galley here in our blood, and so I still feel like I'm from O'Galley. So I'm going to kind of just talk real briefly about that. I'm going to also talk to you about a few things that I enjoyed growing up here in O'Galley, and then a few things that could have happened here that would have changed the face of O'Galley, Melbourne tremendously, but it did not happen. And we have a lot of things that are on display here, but I'm going to go ahead and do mine a little bit differently. I'm going to go ahead and pass a lot of this stuff around, and once you get it, just kind of keep passing it back and forth, and then Wiley will collect it at the very end, or if it doesn't get all the way to the end, please don't leave with them. These are the only copies I have, and just make sure you drop them off, okay? First of all, I'm going to show you, pass around the city of O'Galley. This is downtown O'Galley in 1925. This was at the main intersection, which is now O'Galley Boulevard and Highland Avenue, and the city park, which is right here. That's the city park. So that's one of them that I'm going to go ahead and show you.
Is that the thing, which is now the Italian restaurant?
It's a pizza parlor.
Well, it definitely has changed since that time, but yeah, you'll notice that. Also, here are some aerials of the Ballard Park area. Now, the Ballard Park area, one is from 1950, the other one's from 1952, and this is where the harbor is at right here, and you can see them building the O'Galley Causeway, dredging the material in, and I just thought that was an interesting picture. This was another interesting picture. This is in 1961 November, this is on the beach side where O'Galley comes and connects to A1A. So we'll just pass that around too. Oh, I forgot, this is, sorry about that. This is another picture of downtown O'Galley. This is at the corner of O'Galley Boulevard and Highland Avenue, and it's looking back toward current day US 1. This used to be old US 1 back in this day, and there's a Pure gas station. This is on the corner, but one more building down is where O'Galley Hardware is at. So a lot of you know where O'Galley Hardware is at, so, okay? And just pass it back and forth. I also mentioned a census. This is a copy of the census of the Melbourne O'Galley area in 1880. And it's kind of interesting to look at because it actually put the actual occupation of a lot of the people actually that lived here at that time. And on the very last page, it actually shows that there were 238 homesteads on the east side of the St. John's and 89 on the west side. And also I mentioned about Seminole Indians. We had 15 Seminole Indians that lived here in that area here. And if it goes back here, just kind of push it back around, okay? One of my famous spots growing up, and I'm not going to talk about this, but was the Van Croy Theater. And I think I talked to you all about the Van Croy Theater, about roaches crawling up my leg and spiders crawling across my arm. I'm not going to get into that again. But the Van Croy Theater was built in 1925, and it was on the US 1 over here, the 1900 building, which is between Strawbridge and New Haven. The Van Croy Theater was right on the north end of the 1900 building. It butted it. And so, and I can remember sitting in the audience during the movie, and we could see the rats running across the stage. And
That's why I never went back.
and I can remember Saturday matinees there where you would, if you were on the bottom section, they had a balcony, but you would not sit past the edge of the balcony because all the older kids and stuff would go up to the top and they would throw down their Cokes on you and popcorn and you would get drenched. But I just came across one of the items here that this Van Croy Theater had the world premiere of Edgar G. Robinson, and it was of the Big Leaguer. It was a movie that was made back in those days, and this is 1953, and this is the front page of the O'Galley News. I just thought you'd like to get a kick out of that. Another little section I brought, a lot of us graduated, well, not that many of us, there's a lot of Melbourneites here. Wiley's one, I guess your Barbara's one. I graduated from O'Galley. And this is where the dedication of O'Galley High School took place at the new location. And this was in 1964, in January, the first part of that. So I want to take a look at that. And I haven't got to my stories yet either, guys. I'm sorry. Hold on. This is my last thing that I'm going to go ahead and pass around. This is a copy of the newspaper that was in 1940, March 15th. The reason why we have this, this is laminated, but my grandfather passed away, and this was the article about him being passed away. He was in a car accident. They were driving up, this is one of the things I'm going to talk about just briefly, but he was driving up to St. Augustine. And this is one of the things that could have changed the face of O'Galley, Melbourne. It just didn't happen. He was a civil engineer and surveyor, and they were competing at that particular time for the new port. The new port here in Brevard County was either at Cape Canaveral or O'Galley. And the leaders in O'Galley already had a plan in place where they would cut a grade from Canova Beach. It would go actually right down O'Galley Boulevard into the Indian River, Banana River. It was a desired location because that's right where the two rivers join together at the end of Merritt Island. The other thing is that they had a big hotel at that time that was called the Trade Winds and later turned on to the Oleander Hotel. They actually had people that were going to be building docks and stuff along the O'Galley side to incorporate this port. And they went up to St. Augustine, and this was getting near one of the final meetings. And on the way back, my grandfather was a little tired, so the other gentleman offered to drive. Well, he was tired too, but they went off the road, they wrecked it, killed my grandfather, the other man survived. But after that, it actually kind of died down. But Collis Canova was going to donate his property over there. The Gleasons were going to donate their property. So there was a lot of planning that was already done to bring this port in. And just by fate, with this happening, this actually just killed the opportunity for O'Galley to become a port. We could have been a port here again. There's lots of politics involved in this, but here again, it was a possibility that we could have been a port. Another thing that politics played into, we could have been the site of the University of Florida here in O'Galley. A lot of you probably know about this, but William Hunt Gleason, who was a lieutenant governor, he came down in Abraham Lincoln sitting down to originally to figure out if the state of Florida could be a slave state. And just when the war was over, they would just make a state for the black Americans here. And he said no, that it was not inhabitable. But he came down, he left Wisconsin where he lived, and he bought a bunch of property down in Miami. So I don't understand this. I don't understand this. And but he was apparently very well off, and he had lots of political connections. But he also came up into the O'Galley area. He platted out the original, all the old downtown O'Galley area. They had thousands and thousands and thousands of acres up here that he purchased and whatever. And they were going to donate like 2,254 acres or something along that line. It was a large number of acreage that they were going to be donating for a college up here. And what happened, like all politics, is that while they were doing this, and actually it had moved from 2 other locations or 3 other locations. I have to go back to my history to double check. But finally, they at that time, the Republicans were in power, and they were going to be putting the college here in O'Galley. Well, it just so happened they had an election, and then the Senate changed to Democratic control, and they impeached the governor. And then, I'm going to tell you a little story about that too. So, William Hunt Gleason, who was the lieutenant governor, well, he said, well, if they impeached him, the governor, he said, well, then I should be the governor. So he locked himself in the governor's office, and a lot of you probably don't know this story. And the Senate chairman and the sergeant-at-arms came and knocked the door open and forced William Hunt Gleason out at gunpoint. So he was our only governor that we had for one day. Now, the history books don't look at it that way, but I had to just let you know about this story. The Gleasons and the Wickhams, we've been friends for a long, long time, and this is one of my stories that my dad passed down to me over the years. So that could have been another item that really could have changed the fate of this area, and we could have had, and eventually from here it moved up to Gainesville, and it became the University of Florida. So we could have been the University of Florida. Yes, sir.
Went to Lake City.
Went to Lake City. That's right. Correct. So there's a man that knows this history. I appreciate that. And and we've been very fortunate to also have the Kennedy Space Center here. That has helped with the growth, as you know, as is helping with the growth today of the community and things along that line. The only other thing I'm going to talk about, like I said, I can be up here all day talking to you about O'Galley, but I want to talk about one of my favorite places to go to growing up. That was the O'Galley Speedway. So, okay. When the O'Galley Speedway first opened, it was called Spinning Wheeled Speedway. Okay, it was located always off of Wickham Road, and it opened in 1957. I can remember, I can remember certain events out there just like it was yesterday, and because they kind of, and yeah, I bet you if there was other people that went to O'Galley Speedway here at that time, they can tell stories too. Okay, one of my favorite stories that I remember is that there was 2 guys. This was in the 50s. That were racing around that track, and they were banging at each other the whole way around, and and they were getting, you could tell they were getting mad at each other because they kept hitting each other. Well, they actually spun out right in front of the starter stand, and then both drivers got out of the car, and then I remember old Stan Cross had to go and flag all the cars down to stop them because the race was still on. They got out of the car and started slugging each other. And then the pit crews saw what was happening, so they ran over from the pit crews. Then the pit crews started fighting each other. Then the next thing that we knew is that people started pouring out of the stands onto the racetrack. They started fighting each other. We had, and I'm not exaggerating, we had about 100 people out there on the racetrack fighting each other. And it went on for about 5 minutes. I remember my dad sitting up in the bleachers right next to the press box, and he was kept motioning forward this. We had this big fire truck from Patrick Air Force Base, and it was the county bought it as a surplus that had one big nozzle on the top of it. I don't know if you ever seen these things drive around. And so Dad kept signaling over, and then he told the announcer, he says, tell him to get that fire truck over here. And so the announcer kept making the announcement, and finally the guys in the fire truck heard him. So they came over, and they parked it, and they turned on the hose. I can remember guys flying down the asphalt and shooting them and going down about 20 feet and just pushing them across. Boy, that fight just stopped just like that. And I can remember that. I can remember another time when Stan Cross, who was a flagman, got extremely excited, and there was an accident on the back stretch. So he jumped off the starter stand and started running across the track, waving his legs to stop. Well, there was two cars coming around the track that were racing. He did not see, and they hit him, and they knocked him up in the air about 20 feet, and he landed on the top of one of the cars, and they busted both his legs. I don't know what other damage they did to him, but he survived, and he came back to do flagging there. But I can remember that car hitting him and just bouncing him up in the air and coming back down. That was another thing. I can remember, you might even remember certain stunt shows like Joey Chitwood. Now, Joey Chitwood was a famous stunt car driver. He used to come to O'Galley Speedway about every 2 years or whatever. I can remember his little son, Joey Chitwood Jr., when they would get the car on two wheels, and they would drive all the way around the track on two wheels. And I can remember little Joey Chitwood Jr., who was only about 8 years old, he would get out and stick his head out the window on the top of the side passenger car and wave at everybody as they were going around the track. I can remember that. So have wonderful memories of demolition derbies out there. And it was just a fun place to be. And I wish that we had it today. When the races were on, of course, there was no mufflers on the cars or anything else. You could actually hear the races from the beach side here. If you lived in Satellite Beach or in Harbor Beach, you knew every Saturday night when they were racing, because the sound traveled that far out, and people could hear it all the way over the beach side. But also the racetrack kept in operation up until the 70s. Our Congressman Bill Prosey, and he actually used to race out there, and he was a part owner of it also. And he has some wonderful pictures on YouTube that if you ever want to go to and look up O'Galley Speedway, and they have some pictures that he has from a lot of the race car drivers back in those days. There's also a section where Buddy Pittman, who used to be the Channel 2 news guy, went out there and did a special for about a 10-15 minute on the O'Galley Speedway. There is one little piece of it still left. If you got to go out in the woods, and it's about a 20 by 15 foot section of asphalt that's still there that they never did actually tear up. And where it's located at, everybody knows where Krispy Kreme Donuts is at, right? Okay, on Wickham Road? Okay. And if you go to the next business park, 3 buildings up from there, that is where the Speedway was at. It's called the Wickham Business Park now. But so it is there. And these are old posters that they had. This is when it was called the O'Galley Speedway, which was toward the end of its life here. And I got this out of a store window. I went and asked the owner when I was a little boy if I could have it, and he gave it to me. So on this one. This one, I hate to say I took off a telephone pole when I was a little boy. But this is when it was called the Brevard County Speedway. So it had its name changed quite a few times. But I cherish these things because they have a lot of really wonderful memories for me. So, yes.
When did they close the Speedway?
I don't have the exact date with me. I could look it up, but I don't remember. It was in the late 70s, so that they did. They went through a lot of different owners on the Speedway. I know my dad was a part of the original group that started it, and he said he never made a dime off of it. And but they had several owners over the years. I know Bill Posey was even a part of owner of the racetrack when he was racing there. And I can remember, I shouldn't be saying this, but I can remember one of the race car drivers out there. Apparently, he borrowed some money from my dad, and he never paid Dad back. And so Dad said, well, when am I going to get this money back? He said, well, I'll tell you what, Joe, I'll go ahead and let you keep my racing car as collateral. And so Dad thought that was a pretty good deal because he knew this guy loved the race, and he knew that he was not going to let his car sit there that long. And so we actually had a race car that was used out of Daly Speedway in our garage for a year. And then finally the guy paid Dad, and Dad let him have the race car back. But I can still remember that today. Guys, thanks a lot for coming. We enjoyed it. I'll be around with questions.
Our final presenter is a gentleman who, when I think of having a collection of things, or what's in your closet, or sharing something, someone who is attracted to many kinds of things, historic value, and a gentleman who is kind of a man for all seasons, John Daly. He retired from Harris Corporation as a software engineer. He plays the piano and dances. He received a law degree and currently has a practice as a retired gentleman. He has a master's degree in historic preservation from Savannah College of Art and Design. He is a folk dance instructor. He writes scoring programs for the International Dog Trials. Is that correct? Did I get that? Thank you, I got that. And he's a collector of many interesting things. So he was kind of the top of the list for this kind of thing. So I'm happy to present John Daly. And we'll get to know John a little better today, too. He retired as president of Green Gables, but he's still working there.
Well, you know, I worked on Green Gables for many years. When I got my master's degree in historic preservation, Green Gables became my project because one of the first things they ask you to do is to do a survey of historic resources in your community. And it didn't take long to realize that in this community, if you are looking at the period before 1900, Green Gables is the historic resource left. So when Carol asked me to bring some things, I was, okay, what am I going to bring in? Marion brought her concertina, and I thought, well, you know, this is sort of an interesting gadget. What would people use for music? What's the veterans connection here? Well, on board ships, they might have used something like this. This is a fairly simple little gadget that was developed in the 1820s or thereabouts. Up until that time, if you wanted to make music, well, you had stringed instruments, you had fiddles, and you had panpipes and flutes. But the idea of a free reed, that you could take a piece of metal and make it vibrate and play music, was sort of a new thing. So this was one of the first forms that was taken, and it was very popular on board ships as the sailors would make their little... Notice a couple things about it. It's very simple. If you push two buttons together, you get a concordant note. 3 buttons here gives you a C major chord as it happens. The one row of buttons will be in C, the next one will be in a different key, so you can very easily play, very much kind of like a harmonica. So if you want to play a scale, you can play a cymbal too, if I maybe. So you get a little tune out of it. But one of the problems is it's a little awkward and it has a very limited range because you can only get the, you only have 20 notes here. And you have this problem of having to, let's see, what note do I want? Do I push or do I pull? So it's not only which key do I push, but do I pull or do I push? So the next version that came out, I'll set that one there and come over here.
Can you hear John in the back? Okay.
This is an English concertina. And you'll note, these are, built out of wood, they're nicely designed, but this one, when you play it, it doesn't matter whether you're pushing or pulling, you get the same note. And to play a scale, you alternate the sides, so you play. So this was another form. This is about the same period of time when Green Gables was built. And think about this for a moment. Young ladies, this was a period when perhaps the fiddle was a seriously dangerous instrument, the instrument of the devil. But it was considered proper for young ladies, like perhaps Nora Wells or Gladys Wells, to play one of these. And I am not an accomplished musician, but people who knew how to play this could play advanced violin music and give exciting concerts. So it's a really interesting instrument. Well, by the way, you have Marion to thank for this little demonstration, bringing in her concertina in my mind. Well, but what if you couldn't play like me? Then you might have something like this. And I'm not quite sure where I'm going to set this conveniently. Maybe over here? Sort of. As I talked a little bit, I talked to you about free reed instruments. So this is like a barrel organ. But instead of having organ pipes, it has free reed. So basically a piece of brass set in a frame, and it vibrates. And as it vibrates, it makes the music. How many of you remember reed organs? Yes? And if you got tired of that one tune, you could replace the roller and have an infinite range of tunes. Okay, so that's my little 10-minute demonstration.
That will conclude. I'll save my gourds for next year. And my story that goes with them. Thank you to everyone. And we can pull